Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, well, we'll bring you our usual helping of politics tonight in two parts. Of course, less than a week now, or I should say just over a week until the election, the November election. Both parties hard at work. It's crunch time for them and also for undecided voters who haven't yet decided who they'll vote for in the gubernatorial race and some of the constitutional officers. In Boston, perhaps one of the largest groups of undecided voters might be a surprising source, voters of color. And over the weekend, last Friday to be exact, my first guest threw out a challenge to voters of color, asking them to look at not the Democratic Party, as is typically the case, but also the Republicans this time as well. Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition joins us, and we'll talk about his column and how the candidates stack up, how the races are breaking down. Then in the second half, there's yet another election in November. No, not on November 4th. This one later in the month, as the president of the Boston chapter of the NAACP faces re-election. Since taking up the mantle, Michael Curry has done a lot to bring the once storied civil rights organization back to life here in Boston. He's facing a stiff challenge this year, and we'll talk to him about his prospects on the second half. All that and more tonight on Talk of the Neighborhood. All right, we're back with Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, a two-part show, all politics as is our usual wont. First up, the state election, now just 8 days away, and it's crunch time for all of the candidates, both parties and some independent candidates as well, and also for voters here in the city of Boston. And amongst those undecided voters, well, it might be a surprise to you, it includes many people of color that are voting in this race. Neither of the major political parties has a candidate of color on their ballot this year, and it's raising some questions of who best can serve their interests. And one of those questioning that, who I think it's fair to say sent a little salvo across the bow of the state Democratic Party, is to not take voters of color for granted. I'm talking about the one of the founders, the founder of the New Democracy Coalition. He's also a columnist for the Boston Herald. His article appeared in last Friday's Herald. He's here tonight to talk about it. I'm talking about Kevin C. Peterson, and nice to have you here, Kevin, as always.
Nice to be here.
Well, let's see. That's almost borders on blasphemy or sacrilegious to talk about asking voters to consider. I think most of your article was directed towards black voters in particular, right. To consider someone other than the Democrats, the party that first elected the first African-American president, the first African-American governor. What were you thinking, Kevin?
Well, the thinking is about independence, political independence that leads to the black community, black political community, leveraging their electoral power. I think, and many of others agree, that to put all your eggs in one basket, short-term and long-term, may be detrimental. By the way, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, who freed the slaves, which has an interesting political connection for black people, and a lot of black people haven't forgotten that. So it is not
so out of the realm?
Blasphemous, no. I mean, you have to recall that even more recently, the black community voted for Senator Ed Brooke, who was a Republican in the 60s. The black community voted in higher numbers for the Weld and Cellucci administration, and there was a great deal of diversity within those administrations. One of our heroes, the late great Bruce Bowling, his Mass Alliance organization was blessed by the Republican Party in the state. So there's always, historically, been opportunities for the black community to engage the Republican community and gain some political power and leverage. So the article that was written, the column, really focused on opportunity for the black community to expand its power, as opposed to taking a shot across the bow to any particular party.
Well, talk about that. What kind of opportunity? Now, traditionally, Republicans, at least nationally, have been very conservative and perhaps increasingly so. I don't think anybody would put Charlie Baker in that category yet.
No, I don't.
You know, as you get bombarded by national elections, a variety of news sources, including social media, some people want to put that tag on him.
And it's an unfair tag for Charlie Baker. I think if Charlie Baker were any other state in the country, he would probably be a moderate Democrat. So that's not the case here, where a Republican in Massachusetts like Charlie Baker is representative of the Tea Party wing of the National Republican Party. I think Charlie Baker in particular has offered a specific plan. He calls it the urban agenda, that has some that is worth looking at by the black community.
What parts? Expound on that a little bit, because there's been much made of him campaigning in the city. Unlike 4 years ago, where no one saw him.
Well, he's done an extraordinary amount of campaigning. I think it probably has been more than any other Republican candidate, except for Senator Brooke back in the 60s. So he's created this urban agenda. I had the opportunity to see it a couple of weeks ago, and it did make some note in other newspaper and other media. But he talks about job creation within the inner city, within black communities, within communities of color, that is very specific and very granular. He cares about it, and he's willing to put job creation within urban communities on the table as a very important agenda item. He also talks about the importance of reentry and incarceration. So he says that maybe we should look at incarcerate or arrest levels based upon whether they're drug crimes or whether they are connected to just venality. If they're connected to drug addiction and a drug crime, maybe we should look at sentencing on that level differently. Now, I think that's a more compassionate level of jurisprudence and governance and policy making in terms of sentencing than most Republicans would how they would view it, and even Democrats would probably not go that far. So I think that's a very compassionate response, and I like it. And then there's this third issue around reentry. Blacks and Latinos are disproportionately incarcerated. What do we do with them knowing that they're going to come back into the community? How do we prepare them for jobs and family reunification? He's had some thoughtful ideas about that.
Now, he's saying this, but now why do you believe him?
Oh.
Yeah, because you might have noticed this before, but politicians say a lot of things. But,
they do, but I can list a number of things that the Democratic Party is committed to in terms of African American community or poor communities in this state, where there has been failure. Now, the point I'm making in the article is not that we believe them or trust them. We invest in their campaign and we leverage our power to push them towards doing what they said they were going to do.
So if, in fact, voters step up and show some support for them, you think it'll be reciprocated?
Well, generally, that's how it works. Yeah. That's how any other community, the Irish, the Italian, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, not only in Massachusetts but across the country, they concentrate their power in terms of voting, and then if their candidate wins, they push for the specific spoils of the election. I mean, that's just how power is wielded historically and even now. And the problem with the black community in the state is that that they have been too reliant on one party. And so the result has been that they have been essentially ignored by Democrats and ignored by Republicans.
Don't you risk, though, now Governor Patrick has been campaigning very hard for Martha Coakley, and don't you risk kind of alienating, though, and
well, no,
turning your back on, obviously his racist side has made major changes, including putting many people of color into positions of power and administrative spots in his administration, I should say. Don't you risk kind of turning your back on that?
I remain a registered Democrat, by the way, as do many of my friends. For me, this is not a question of abandoning one party for the other. It's a matter of understanding the pure calculus of politics. So if there are clear gains to be made by by investing in one candidate over the other, then it makes all the sense in the world for that group of people, that electoral bloc, to gravitate towards the candidate that presents the most goods for that community. So I would hope that the Democratic Party wouldn't take it personally. I remain a diehard Democrat.
Even though now you have endorsed Charlie Baker, is that correct? I
support him. I haven't. I have endorsed the urban agenda. I have not gone on the record to endorse him personally or his campaign. So for me, the column was my attempt to push the African American community towards meaningfully engaging in the game of politics, and sometimes that means not being connected in any kind of sympathetic or overly emotional way to one party over the other.
Well, some have suggested, and we've gone through this whole phase of New Boston, Old Boston, whatever, but that, with the election of Deval Patrick, with the election of Barack Obama, we've kind of entered this, for lack of a better term, post-racial politics phase where race is not so important anymore. And do you find that true now?
Well, no, it's not true, because all across the nation and even in the Commonwealth, black people disproportionately suffer from issues that about which public policy can impact. So when you talk about incarceration, blacks disproportionately. You talk about poverty. You talk about the disproportionate number of people of color on welfare. All of those issues can be addressed through public policy. So the idea of us being in and that's locally, statewide, and nationally.
And you're not concerned, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but because one of Charlie Baker's planks, one of the things that he's talking about in his ads, and I'm playing a little devil's advocate here, but he's talking about welfare reform. Now, in any other time, any other era, that means, I don't know, pushing some people off welfare.
I think everyone believes in welfare reform. I mean, because all of us would not like to have anybody on welfare. I mean, all of us, including those who are on welfare, would want a job. My personal story is that my mother was once on welfare.
A lot of people were.
Right? And she was no more relieved than when she got off welfare. So this misnomer that poor people enjoy themselves on welfare is a canard. I'm not sure if Charlie Baker's welfare plan will work, but I am intrigued that he would express some sympathy around employing people, getting people employed and off the public doles as taxpayers and as contributing citizens. I think for him to bring that up in such dramatic terms deserves an applaud. There's no one I know, either growing up or even currently, who are of color in particular, who are women, enjoy being on welfare.
So somehow
wanna get
that's
off.
being cast as a negative and wouldn't.
Well, it goes back to Reagan in 1980, where he talks about the welfare queen who drives around in Cadillacs. I mean, that was a fiction that was created, and it's been used by many members of the Republican Party across the country. I think we should be fair to those who are Republican, who want to show some compassion and want to do some real hard thinking about getting people off welfare. That person should be applauded. Now, that person, that candidate, Charlie Baker in particular, should be also held accountable. If he wins and he does nothing meaningful about welfare, just in terms of providing programming and education and then job training and then jobs, he should be held accountable by those who were on welfare, and in particular, black people.
4 years from now,
4 years from now.
pay the price. Again, Kevin C. Peterson is one of the founders of the New Democracy Coalition, here tonight in the run-up to the final election in 8 days, talking about the gubernatorial race. Your group, the New Democracy Coalition, is that what it's about? Taking new ideas or taking new concepts of power, or how to exercise power? How do you explain that?
It focuses on all those. You're absolutely right. There is a focus on voter registration and voter education, what we call civic literacy, and electoral justice. So we do work on election day at the polls to ensure that election day is equal for everyone, particularly within communities of color. And then we look at policy, particularly election policy or voting policy. So a couple of years ago, we were in the middle. We were leading the effort around redistricting statewide and within the city. So our organization sort of focuses in a nonpartisan way, by the way, around getting voters more engaged, particularly around elections, but also around issues that impact them in their community and in their home.
And this is one of them. We've got just a couple minutes left. I've got to ask you, of course, as Deval Patrick enters his final weeks as governor of the Commonwealth, and of course, President Obama's about to enter his last 2 years as a lame duck as well. How do you think they are viewed, and how do you think that, how have they presented to the country and the state as a whole, because there was so much made of the fact that they broke new ground. They,
I think that
historic figures, obviously, in their own right, but as governor, as president, how do you think they stack? How do they stack?
As an African American speaking, I think that they both have been extraordinarily inspirational. They have been groundbreakers, and they've managed to comport themselves and express themselves in ways that caught the imagination of the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the country. I think that's extraordinary, given the fact that we are only 50 years away from the Voting Rights Act. So for them to represent only the second generation since the Civil Rights Act, to represent themselves as leaders of a state and the country is extraordinary. And even if that is their legacy, it will be extraordinary. Now, they've also done some pretty extraordinary things in terms of public policy. Can't discount the importance of what they call Obamacare. It's going to be a major political legacy that no other president has ever been able to achieve since FDR, who last made a real significant attempt. And then we look at Governor Patrick. He's just been extraordinary in terms of focusing on public safety, focusing on education, helping to close the achievement gap. So I am particularly proud of both of them. They're my leaders. And I'm just glad that they had the chance to serve.
Think it will change forever how people look at candidates regardless of their race or because of their race?
I think it will. I mean, I think that it was an interesting experience for the broader state and the broader country that included non-people of color, to get a sense around the governing capacity and the rhetoric that comes out of the black community and the inspiration that comes out of it. I think it now makes the country, over time, the country and the Commonwealth, a more integrated society.
Well, and we shall see. It's certainly a legacy there. We've got just a minute left. Were you surprised? I have one last question. Were you surprised by the Boston Globe endorsement of Charlie Baker this morning? What is the world coming to? First of all, Kevin Peterson tells people of color they should consider voting Republican. Now the Boston Globe, the liberal bastion of the media, endorsing Charlie Baker. What's the world coming to?
Well, I think Kevin Peterson and the Boston Globe, I don't know, see in Charlie Baker a person who possesses enormous compassion and managerial skills, and a charisma that's right for the time and moving forward in the post-Deval Patrick era.
Ready to take the risk again. Kevin C. Peterson is the founder of the New Democracy Coalition, still doing some work with over at UMass
That's right.
Boston as well, and now a regular columnist on the op-ed page for the Boston Herald. Kevin, as always, I enjoyed having you here.
Yeah, hope to
Thanks
be
so
back
much.
soon.
I hope to have you back.